Talmud says like this. The Talmud says that there are two vessels in the two things that in the tabernacles that that are there to help us repent for lashon hara. Now I want to give a little background. Right, the idea of lashon hara, right, is that the idea of the vessels in the tabernacles, the Mishkan as we know it, right? There's this concept that the different vessels or the clothes of the tabernacles of Mishkan are there to help us get a deeper understanding of how to repent, how to do tshuva, right? And also, it's a mystical idea. It sort of repents for us. Now, there's no way of something repenting for us without us doing anything, right? Even Yom Kippur, right, which we spoke about, the Talmud tells us Yom Kippur itself is mechaper. Yom Kippur itself is something that it repents. Right? The day of Yom Kippur itself repents. The commentaries say that's of course only right if you do something. Right? That's only if you think about the day. Right? There's one opinion that holds not, but most opinions you have to do. You have to have a thought. So there's this concept in the mystical world, and the Talmud speaks about this in the commentaries when dealing with the tabernacles, when dealing with the clothes that the Kohen Gadol wears, or some of the services that the Kohen does or the Kohen Gadol does. Right? The commentaries speak about different things that each one is mechaper. Each one brings a atonement, right, for a certain transgression, right? And just on a side note, this is actually one of the ideas that people struggle. Right? The tabernacles is not with us in our days, anyways. Right? We don't have tabernacles. Even once they built the Beis Hamikdash, they didn't have the tabernacles. Right? The avodah, the service of the Beit Hamikdash, and the tabernacles is not applicable to us nowadays. Right? We hope, yes, Mashiach will come, and then it will become applicable to us. We pray for that every day. Right? But what are we supposed to learn from learning the verses? So there's many answers to that question. The different measurements are things that we're supposed to learn from. Each thing has its thing that it's supposed to learn from. But one of the things that the commentaries explain is that in the mystical realm, the different either clothes or vessels or service repents is an atonement for certain averot, and it teaches us about how we're supposed to connect to ourselves within that averah, within that transgression, to make sure that we atone for that transgression. And the Talmud tells us that there's actually two things for lashon hara. Lashon hara, of all things, right? There's two separate things that atone for lashon hara. Right? Other things, killing someone, there's only one thing, right? For adultery, there's another thing, right? For different, and again, it doesn't automatically happen. We have to reflect on it and think about it, right? But for lashon hara, right, of all things, right, there's two separate things that atone for lashon hara. It's like you need an extra juice, an extra power, right, to atone for lashon hara. Right, so I want to talk about this for today, and try to get a better understanding again of the depth of lashon hara, because unfortunately we don't have the book. And again, thank you guys for bearing with me on that. Right, so what are the two things that atone for lashon hara? One is one of the garments of the Kohen Gadol, not just of a Kohen, the Kohen Gadol, right, the high priest. And another is one of the avodah, one of the service that they do. So let's talk about each one individually, and we'll talk about them together. Which garment of the Kohen Gadol atones for lashon hara? It's called the me'il. Right? What is the me'il? Very good. Me'il is an apron. Right? Me'il is an apron. Now, what was special about this apron? This apron had some very significant different colors, but also on the bottom of the apron, very good. There were bells, right? There were bells, very good, right? As Emily mentioned, you guys couldn't hear her, I'll repeat it, right? But there were bells on the bottom of the me'il, of this robe. Now the robe went sort of all the way down to his ankles, just about around his ankles, and there were pomegranates with bells inside of them, right? And this, whenever he walked, right? Whenever he walked, it would make noise. So people knew the Kohen Gadol was coming. Now, one of the important things of knowing that the Kohen Gadol was coming is, first of all, because when the Kohen Gadol came, there was a respect that everybody had to adhere to when he walked in. Just like we have when a great rabbi walks in, or someone of elder stature, or a parent or a teacher walks into a classroom, we are supposed to stand up, right? There's a sign of respect. We know that concept from the Kohen Gadol, because the Kohen Gadol, it wasn't for him, it was for the status of what he represents. Right? But when he walked in, right, they made sure, right, that everybody knew that he was coming, right? And that ringing of the bells, right, people knew that the Kohen Gadol was coming. Another lesson we actually learned from here, this is on a side note, which is actually very important, right? The concept of making yourself aware, not startling people, right? So the Talmud actually tells us that when one walks into their home, even into their own home, one should knock on the door, right? One should just knock on the door and walk in, right? Not to startle people, especially if it's not your own home, even if you're a guest or if you have permission to come in, right? But even in your own home, now, I'll be honest, I don't practice that way, because I pull into my driveway and I think everybody knows that I'm coming in, right? Because there's this little hump that I have to go over, right? Also, the kitchen windows are right there so they could see, right? But, and you know, some people actually, I know some people just give a little knock on the door, right? Not necessarily anybody can hear, but there's this idea not to startle people, right? This idea of that you should make your presence known, right? And not creep up on people. That's a side point, But says the Talmud that the me'il, this garment with the pomegranates, right, which makes noise, right, it comes to atone for the sin of lashon hara, for speaking evil about other people, right? As we said last week, and just to remind ourselves, and we'll see this in the book itself, lashon hara does not mean that it's false, right? Lashon hara could be true, but speaking negative about other people, right? That is what it's coming to atone, right? So by walking around and making this noise, that's what it comes to atone. What's the other thing that is atoning for lashon hara? Right? The other thing that atones for lashon hara is the service called the ketores. Right? What is the ketores? Right? The ketores is the incense, right? The special spices that are great, make this great aroma, right? This great smell, right? That was done in the tabernacles. It was done in the temple, right? The ketores is also the special service that Aaron did when there was a plague, right? After the rebellion of Korach, and when Korach rebelled against Moshe, and the earth swallowed him up, and then all the Jewish people complained to Moshe and said, "You're killing the Jewish people." God said, "I don't like that," right? Send out a plague and started wiping them out. Right? So Moshe told Aaron to take his pan and put the special scents on it and make this aroma, the special ketores, and walk around, and the evil inclination, right, the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, had no power and prevented the plague from happening. So the ketores is very lofty, very spiritual kind of service, right? It's a spiritual service. It's a smell, right? Again, which we'll see is connected to this idea, right? But that's the power of the ketores. Says the Talmud in a different tractate, right? That comes to atone for lashon hara. So now, of course, the obvious question is, why does lashon hara need two? We know lashon hara is bad, right? It's a terrible thing, and we'll see how bad it is, right? And we'll learn about it, right? Hopefully in the next probably couple of months, right? But why does it need two different separate things to atone? And one of them is the garment, and one of them is a service. Like, what's the connection between the two, and why such a lofty thing of the ketores and the me'il, which makes noise? Right? What's the connection between the two, and why do you need two separate things to atone for lashon hara? And that's the question that the commentaries ask. And the answer is, any thoughts? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
When did the Kohen Gadol, did he only wear that outfit when he was doing like before? Or when did he wear
Okay, so Emily's asking this me'il that that the Kohen Gadol wore. When did he wear it? Did he only wear it on Yom Kippur, or did he wear it all the time? And the answer is that he wore it all the time. Right? So just yeah, he wore it all every day. The Kohen Gadol. Thank you for asking that. It's an interesting tidbit, but an important fact to know. Right? One of the ways that we knew who the Kohen Gadol was, right, was through the extra 4 clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore more than a regular Kohen. Every Kohen had 4 clothing that he wore, right? The hat, the robe, right? A regular robe, right? A belt, right? Pants, mechanasayim, right? There was 4 clothing that the Kohen Gadol, the regular Kohen wore. The Kohen Gadol had an extra 4 clothing, right? He had the tzitz, right? A special banner on his forehead that had God's name on it, right? He had the me'il, which we're talking about now with the pomegranates, right? He had the choshen, right? The breastplate, right? With the names of all the tribes on it. And so he had 4 extra clothing. His hat was a different kind of hat, right? He had 4 extra clothing that a regular Kohen had. Now, a very interesting tidbit. One of the ways they made a Kohen Gadol was anointing him with oil. Right, with a special oil, right? Not just any ordinary oil, right? Even if it was, the best quality virgin, clean virgin, the best kind of oil, organic to the core, right? The purest. No, it was a special kind of oil, and this oil actually was all the way from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu squeezed these olives, right? I don't know how much he made, but it was a miracle. It stayed, right? And they used this a little bit, and they anointed the Kohen Gadol, and they anointed also the kings, right, with that oil. But that oil was removed by Chizkiyahu Hamelech, right? When he hit a couple of things, he prophesied about the destruction of the temple, about 150 years to 100 years before the destruction of the temple. I have to look up the exact numbers. And he hid a couple of things. One of the famous things he hid was the Aron, right? The Ark, right? Yes, Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? They looked for it, right? They all got blown up and they became skeletons, right? But Raiders of the Lost Ark comes from this tradition that we have, right? That Chizkiyahu, the king, hid a couple of things. It's brought down in the Talmud. One of the things he hid was the Aron, the Ark, right? And he hid the special oil, right? Because he said that for whatever reason, that was one of the things he hid. So once he hid that, how were they able to anoint and make someone a Kohen Gadol, right? So one of the other ways of knowing that someone's a Kohen Gadol is through him, the first time he put on the extra 4 clothing. Right, so it's something that he always wore. These extra 4 clothing was something that he always wore. Right, every time he was walking around. Yes, it's kind of heavy. We're like, oh, just give me a tank top and a t-shirt. Right, I'm like, okay, let's give me a polo shirt and I'll be good. Right, but he wore all these clothes. Right, it's like someone wearing his jacket and his hat and his tie, and it's sort of firefighters putting on all their extra gear. Okay, they don't wear it all the time, but he wore it all the time. He was in the service when he was walking around the streets, not necessarily he wore that. I mean, it's only when he was in the temple during the service. But any day of the year, when he's doing that. For Yom Kippur, he had special white clothes that were special for Yom Kippur, and so there was special clothes just for Yom Kippur. But getting back to our discussion, right? So the question we asked was, why do we need 2 separate things to atone for Lashon Hara? Again, with our thinking about atoning for it. It's not just magic. It doesn't just happen. But why do we need 2 separate things atoning for Lashon Hara? Number one, the me'il, this robe with the pomegranates on the bottom with the bells, right? And the ketoras, the special sacrifice of the scents and the smells, right, on the pan, right, which, as we mentioned, was a very lofty kind of service. Why do we need these 2 separate things to atone for Lashon Hara? So the commentaries answer like this. And the commentaries say that the idea is that there's 2 types of Lashon Hara. There's 2 types of Lashon Hara. And you're going to think 2 types of Lashon Hara. Yeah, of course, there's the truth and there's the not truth, right? That's Lashon Hara and Rechilas. That's probably one of the first things that's coming to your mind, right? There's 2 types of Lashon Hara, right? Embarrassing someone or just, say the commentaries is another idea of 2 types of Lashon Hara. There's Lashon Hara when you're vocal out loud, saying things vocally, out loud, right? And there's Lashon Hara, the deadly Lashon Hara of quiet Lashon Hara, right? What's quiet Lashon Hara, right? Quiet Lashon Hara is the guy or the gal, right, that is pretending to be your friend, right, but speaks behind your back. Right? The loud Lashon Hara is, you know who they are. They're posting things on Facebook and Instagram and negative rhetoric. They say negative things about you at the board meetings or right, or with friends or at kiddush or whatever it is. Right? These people. Okay, at least you know who they are. You know how they work. Right? And then there's the unaware, unassuming, right, Lashon Hara of the quiet Lashon Hara. Right? The silent gossiper. Right, the one that speaks quietly, says one thing to one person and then lets that spread out. Right, so there's two types of Lashon Hara. We have to talk about both of these Lashon Hara, right, for a couple of minutes, right, and realize that each one needs its own atonement. Each one has its own negative rhetoric, right, of why it's so bad. Right, so say the commentaries like this: the one that's loud, right. So what atones for that? That's the me'il. Right? The me'il makes noise. Right? That's the idea. Why the me'il? The me'il makes noise. Every time you walk in, right, there's bells that ring, and everybody knows that you're walking in. Everybody knows the Kohen Gadol walks in. So, but what's this importance of, as we explained, and I want to elaborate in a couple of minutes, why is it important for Kohen Gadol, for everybody to know that he's walking in? It's respect. Right? It's respect for the Kohen Gadol. It's respect for other people. Don't startle other people. Other people should have the time to prepare themselves to show the proper respect. The idea of the noise over here, right, is on the polar opposite of the loud Lashon Hara. Right? What's the idea of the loud Lashon Hara? Loud Lashon Hara is you don't care about the other person, and to the extent that you don't even care what the other person thinks about you, and so you're just going to shout out and speak and post and do whatever however way you do your Lashon Hara, true or false, doesn't make a difference. Lashon Hara Rechilas doesn't make a difference. And you're just gonna blurt it out, and you want everybody to know that that's how you feel, and you want as many people to figure this out and to find out, and you want to harm this person to the greatest extent. How do we atone for that? By using this same energy of loudness, using the same energy of graciousness, of being out there in a positive way, of respecting people, of making people aware that you're walking in, not to startle people, to let people have the opportunity and to respond to the thing that's coming forward. For example, making sure that they are they stand up before you walk in, to make sure that they show the proper respect for the Kohen Gadol, not just for the Kohen Gadol, but what the Kohen Gadol represents. Right? So the idea of utilizing this energy that someone has, right, of being forward, being strong, being outgoing, being loud, right? It's a good thing. Very good. It could be a good thing, right? But it also could be a terrible thing. And if you use it for Lashon Hara, if you use it to hurt other people, it's a terrible thing. And you're really hurting a lot of people because you're being loud, out there, right? Really pushing it on people. But if you do it in a positive way, means to say that you utilize that same energy to let people know about positive things, to make people aware that people are coming through, right? That people should be more respectful for other people. That's what the Kohen Gadol did, and that's why the Me'il, right, represents the loud Lashon Hara. But the deadly Lashon Hara, right, the real deadly Lashon Hara is when it's quiet. And this, my friends, is something that's much more common. And you don't have that many people. You have, and we are aware of them, right? Especially now with social media. The question is it loud Lashon Hara or quiet Lashon Hara if they have a fake account and they bully people and they do things, through a fake account, right? But if it's their own account and people know who they are, so that's loud Lashon Hara. And so it's made people more susceptible to the loud Lashon Hara because they feel they're hiding behind the computer or a screen. They're not actually talking to the person, but they are. They're talking about the person out loud. Everybody knows their profile is public or it's open to all their friends, right? And they have 200 friends, so that's public, right? So that's also considered loud Lashon Hara, but a more deadly Lashon Hara and a Lashon Hara that is more common is the quiet lashon hara. Right? Is when you just whisper something to your friend, whisper something to one person. And it doesn't have to be a whisper, of course, but in confidence. I want to tell you in confidence, and you make it, and you make it sound like it's a very important thing, right? And you dress it all up, right? And you wrap it in a way that it sounds like it's something that has to be said over to other people. I need to tell you this very important thing. Right? I saw this. It really disturbed me. Right? It's something that really irked me, and I just can't imagine that we have people in the community like this. They're just some of the words that you might hear before you then hear the lashon hara, which has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with the community, right? I can't believe that person. They leave the garbage can out, for 5 days, right? It's a terrible thing, right? I don't know. Okay, like, what does it have anything to do with the community? But or whatever, the way their kids dress, the way that people do, and the lashon hara in a quiet way is dressed up as something, right, that sometimes you make it sound like it's important. And my friends, this is going to be a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about in the book, right? When we have to figure out what's the right way, right, of when you're allowed and when you're not allowed. Right? There are times when you're allowed to say certain things. Right? For example, like we mentioned last week, what happens if someone calls you up about a suggestion for a shidduch, for someone dating, right? And they want some information about someone. What are you allowed to say? What are you not allowed to say? Right? How are you supposed to say certain things? These are very complicated laws. So, the person's asking me about that person. I should just say it, and I'm saying it in confidence. Right? I'm saying it in confidence, and that's a quiet lashon hara. Sometimes you're allowed to say certain things. Sometimes you're not allowed to say certain things. And it's complicated. We're going to go through it, right? And I'll be honest, I need a review of it myself. It's been a little while since I reviewed the laws of lashon hara. And there's a lot of complicated laws to it. But the quiet lashon hara, the ketores comes and atones for it. Why is the ketores coming to atone for it? Because as we said, the ketores is a silent savior. What is so powerful about the ketores? Why was it that the ketores stopped the plague? That Aaron walked around and stopped the plague with the ketores? And the answer is because the ketores is a spiritual, it's not something physical. You take these things and it's a smell. What is the power of smell? The power of smell, right? Taste is food. It's something that makes your body healthier or not healthier, right? It gives you energy. Smell doesn't give you energy. Smell makes you feel good, right? Smell, it's a good smell. That's a terrible smell. Got to go away. Right? Smell is not actually affecting your physical body, but it's affecting your emotional body. It's affecting your spiritual body. Right? It's affecting the part of the body. It doesn't change your blood count, and it doesn't change your calories, and it doesn't change your your cholesterol. Right? Smell doesn't do that. Right? There are some people that are deathly allergic to certain things, and yes, even if they smell it, it affects them. I mean, that's common, but not that common. But the majority of the time, smell is more the aroma of something, right? Gives you a sense if it's good or it's bad, right? There's a power of smell in preparing food, right? There's a whole study that's done that if someone smells certain food, it could be delicious and it could be tasty, but if it has a foul smell, and that's just the way the food is, people wouldn't want to eat it. And people don't want also the presentation of how it looks, and people don't want to eat it. I actually saw a study that they did, that they dimmed the lights and they clogged people's noses, and they told people just to eat just for the taste itself. Right? And it said afterwards they opened the eyes and people go, oh, I can't believe I ate that, right? But it was really good, right? Because these sight and smell are things that make us assume certain things without actually tasting the thing itself. Before actually knowing if it's good or if it's bad, if it's healthy, if it's not healthy, if it's spoiled, if it's not spoiled. Yes, sometimes the smell, we could tell by a smell if it's spoiled, right? But sometimes that's the way. Some cheeses, right, give a bad smell, but that's the way they're supposed to be, right? They taste well. That's their specialty. All right, now I'll stay far away from it because I don't care. It smells horrible. But some people, right? So that's the power of smell. And so say the commentaries that's the idea of quiet lashon hara, right? Quiet lashon hara, right, is something that you're giving a bad smell, right? It's a quiet thing. You're giving a bad smell to someone, right, about a situation without putting it out there, without the person being able to respond, right? Because the person doesn't even know he's being spoken about. Right? The person doesn't even know if he can respond back. If it's out loud, okay, it's terrible and it is a horrible thing, but it gives at least the person to respond back. He could write an article, he could write a post, right? He could respond back. He could call the person up and say, hey, listen, I know you said this about me. All right, let's talk about it. I'll tell you why I did that. I'll tell you why this. Right? I'll call other people. Right? You're able to respond back. You're able to. It's a terrible thing, and you're not allowed to do it. But at least it gives that person the opportunity to respond and to protect themselves and to answer for themselves. Where quiet lashon hara, person doesn't necessarily even know that he's being talked about behind his back, and therefore the ketores, right, which is this power of smell, sort of this thing of not physical, but which is protected the Jewish people from the plague. Because what was the plague? The plague again was the same thing. The Jewish people just blurted out to Moshe, "You are killing the Jewish people." The power of speech, it was loud, because they blurted out to him. But the idea is that they just made an assumption without making any looking behind the scenes and just assuming something. And that's where God said, okay, down with them, boom. So the Ketores came and protected them, saying, no, we have to reevaluate things. We have to re-look at things in a different sense and say, hey, we got to smell things a little differently. And that's the idea of the protecting of lashon hara, the atonement for a quiet lashon hara. Right, so I want to talk about this concept of quiet lashon hara for a minute. The commentaries tell us a very interesting discussion very interesting wording when it speaks about the disagreement between the brothers, right, the 12 tribes. And so as this parsha is Lech Lecha, we're starting with Abraham, and in a couple of weeks, Parshas Vayeshev, right, we'll start talking about the disagreement between Yosef and his brothers. Now, just to put it out there, one always has to remember that they have to learn things with all the commentaries. The Torah tells us that they were all righteous, right? So, of course, there was deeper meanings behind it, and I gave a class once about it on Shabbos afternoon before Mincha, right? Just giving a little insight into the discussion. It was a halachic discussion, a halachic argument. It was a spiritual argument, right? But at the same time, it was a heavy-duty argument to the extent where the brothers felt that they had to get rid of their brother Yosef. But at the same time, we have to remember that the Torah still considers all of them the 12 tribes. They're not like one of them's evil, like Esav or Yishmael. They're all the 12 tribes. We all come from them. And so when the Torah discusses a disagreement, it says, V'lo yachlu l'daber b'shalom. They couldn't talk to him with peace. Right? And the commentary is very strange. They don't even lo yachlu l'daber b'shalom. They couldn't talk to him with peace. They couldn't talk to him. Before they sold him. Right? Before they sold him, the Torah says, they couldn't talk to him in peace. And the commentators, what do you mean they couldn't talk to him in peace? They couldn't talk to him. Right? There was such a disagreement, they couldn't talk. And we see it, right? A couple weeks later, they sold him, or a month later, a year later, whatever it is. We don't know exactly the timeline. Right? But, so what do you mean the Yachol David B'Shalom? So a lot of the commentaries say the same thing, that they talked to him. And they made sure that he knew what their problem was. One of the great things about the tribes were, and what made the argument actually a machlokas, an argument that was for the sake of heaven, that, as we said, it was an argument about halacha, about things, was that they just couldn't talk to him in peace. It means to say they couldn't understand each other, but they actually talked. They did have a discussion. They didn't talk behind his back. They didn't just be quiet and say whatever, and that's it, and not discuss, and this amongst themselves talk about Yosef. Oh, he's terrible. I can't believe it. How could he do this? How could he say such a thing? Right? They didn't do that. They couldn't just talk to him, B'Shalom. They couldn't talk to him with peace because of this agreement that they had. But they disagreed with each other. They talked to each other. They made sure that Yosef knew what their problem was, and Yosef made sure that they knew what his problem was. And they made sure not to keep it as a quiet. They didn't, and therefore, for them, it wasn't actually lashon hara because they were talking to Yosef directly, right? But they didn't keep it inside. They didn't let it boil and come inside and then have to whisper to someone else. One of the key ways how to make sure not to be affected by quiet lashon hara. But if you have a problem with someone, go and talk to them directly. Right? Don't hold it in. Don't let it simmer inside of you, and then you're going to pop. Right? You're going to pop either, and you're going to just post it somewhere and shout out in the middle of shul, or God forbid, get into a loud disagreement in front of other people and scream and shout. Or you're going to do it more in a quiet way, and you're going to talk to your friend, and you're going to write a private text, and you're going to this and that. I saw. Have a conversation with the person. Talk to the person. Even if you come out there, you're not going to agree with each other. But at least you're not going to come to slander the person. True or wrong. But you're going to still slander the person. So make sure you have that conversation. Now, it has to be done in a healthy way. Right? And there's laws about that. Also, how to approach someone, how to talk to someone. Right? How to make sure that when you do talk to them, that it's in a healthy manner. Right? And it doesn't come out that you're just blaming them, or it's a whole topic within itself. But make sure that you don't let it fester inside of you, that then you get either to quiet lashon hara, talking behind their backs, or explode and be loud lashon hara. And so these are something that's very important. Right? We're going to talk a lot about if it's true, if it's not true, what scenario you're allowed to, what scenario you're not allowed to. It's going to give many different examples, right? But this is something that we have to be very aware of, that even when you're just talking to one friend, as we mentioned last week, even if you're talking to your spouse, I'm a big fan of healthy conversation between spouses. They should be talking to each other, right? But there's certain things that you're not allowed to say, certain things that are lashon hara, even to a spouse. Some things you're not allowed to say. And that's quiet lashon hara. Now, if you need to get something off your chest, or this and that, so there's ways, you don't mention names, right? And we'll talk about scenarios. So that's something I really think is very important for us to reflect on and to think about. Right? Just one more thing, and we'll end with this, and we'll open for questions. I don't remember if I got to this last week, and if I did, I apologize, but I think it's just good to say it again. Right? There's a couple of things that sometimes we make excuses of why we think we could speak lashon hara. Right? One of them is, but it's true. So many times, but it's true, especially with kids. Right? But it's true. Right? Just because it's true, as we said, just because it's true doesn't mean to say that it's not lashon hara. If it's not true, then it's a lie, and that's called a rechilas, right? But if it's true, right, that's lashon hara. But true is rechilas, right? Even if it's true, you're still not allowed to talk negative about people. That's something very important to say, right? Another thing is, if she was here, I would say it to her face, or I would say it to his face, right? So sometimes we think that I could do this, but it's not really hurtful because I would say it anyways to the person. Right? So since I would say it to the person, so it's not really going to hurt them because I'm okay with saying it to the person. Right? Doesn't make a difference what you think is hurtful, what's not hurtful. Right? And this one is very common. Right? And this one is usually not the first person that says something. Right? But this is very, very common. And everybody knows about this already. Right? Ruvain or Leah, right, already posted this on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and whatever, a million other sites. Everybody knows about this already. Who cares? Just because everybody knows about it already doesn't make it lashon hara, right? And we'll see about this, right? We'll see about this thing. It was in the paper, and it was this, it was that. Right? I would walk by people in Kiddush and everybody's schmoozing about this. Oh my gosh, you heard about what happened to Yetz's Putzel, right? And you heard what happened to Yentz's Sprensha, right? Just because everybody knows about it is not a reason that you're allowed to say it, right? And again, all these three things we're going to talk about scenarios of how to get around it. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'll take questions in 1 minute. Right? Thank you everybody for joining us. Just a reminder, right? Please text me or email me or call me, right? If you want to purchase a book or if you want to get one of the free books, there's still some available. Again, thank you to the Rosenbaums for sponsoring those books, right? For Shalem, family sister. She should have a speedy recovery. And God willing, we should get the books by the end of this week. We didn't get them next week. They were shipped already. And we will start with the book itself. With lesson 1, and we'll see how many lessons we do per class. And again, it will be, hopefully, if you guys learn a little more, it could be a little more interactive, right? It's really up to you guys how we do the class. We are partners in this class together. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Stop